Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. We're just waiting for one final panelist to arrive, but we figured we might as well crack on and make the most of all of your time. So one of the key, when the coronavirus began, we decided that essentially we were going to refocus all of our work at the CPS, or as much of it as we could, on growth, on this question of how we deliver growth and get the economy moving again after this this awful period. And at the heart of that is small business. One of the things we try to do at the CPS is really focus on SMEs and their needs and what can be done to make life easier for them. And I'm delighted to say that we're joined today by some of the best people in the country to talk about that. Paul Scully, obviously, is the minister responsible for SMEs. Pete Oliver from BT, who have very kindly put together and supported this panel, and Martin McTague from the FSB, and we will be joined by Annie Gascoigne, who's director of the economic policy at the CBI. So, given time is short, we should just crack on. Paul, SMEs, what is their role in recovery and boosting growth, and what is the government going to do to ensure that they have the easiest possible time of it?
No, thanks, Robert. And this is a really timely event. So thanks very much for putting it on. SMEs have a huge role. We know that they make up 99.7% of the UK's companies anyway, and clearly, therefore, not only do we need to make sure that as we wrap our arms around the economy as government, that we support as many SMEs as possible, but also that we put them in the best place to be able to bounce back through that economic recovery as we build back better as well. We know it's been an extraordinary challenge for businesses for all sizes. You know, I ran small businesses for 25 years before I was elected, and I know how much time you spend as a small business owner working for your business and looking for the next deal, looking for the next client, rather than necessarily on the business and that forward looking. So for people to have to take to entrepreneurs to have to take to look for such support at these extraordinary times, I always think, but for the grace of God, go I. So I'm keen to work with as many businesses as I can, and with organisations like yourselves, like the FSB, the CBI, and other bigger companies who are reaching out to their supply chains and beyond to support the business community, which is fantastic. You know that the government has supported over around £66 billion of loans, guarantees and business support. We've spent something like £200 billion wrapping our arms around the economy. Just to put that in scale, the NHS budget is about 130 billion over a whole year. So 200 billion in just a few months is quite an extraordinary undertaking. So we've got to make sure that we balance the public finances with the need to make sure that we are in the right place to bounce back when we can, as we gradually open up the economy and hopefully get to that new reality that lies behind the new normal as the vaccine and mass testing is rolled out as well. So we've extended the application period for business interruption loans and the Future Fund to the end of January 2021. We made cash grants available with these tiered restrictions as well, in addition to the £1.1 billion for councils to further support businesses over the coming months. But as I say, it is tough. So we now need to work out what we do in terms of the post-coronavirus situation as we do bounce back. The manifesto commitment of the Conservative Party of the last year was to make the UK the best place to start and grow a business. I want to go that a little bit further and make sure it shouldn't matter where in the UK you are. You should be able to get consistent business support, consistent advice, peer-to-peer networking, mentoring, access to finance, and obviously access to broadband, which then features in that the wider piece the government has about building back better, i.e. making sure that we've got the right infrastructure for this country as well. And so I'm always open to feedback from small and micro businesses that you engage with that we can consider when developing policy to make sure that we can fully support SMEs going forward. But we should remember as well that we're still ranked 8th in the world for ease of doing business by the World Bank and amongst the very best in Europe. But there's clearly more that we can do to support economic recovery. And that's been highlighted extensively, including in the Business Productivity Review in 2019 and the National Audit Office review into government support to business just earlier this year. So, as I say, I do want to develop a national framework, making sure that we join up Whitehall and locally delivered support as well to make it easier for customers to access that support and increase the impact that it has. So we want to do it through fewer but higher quality schemes, which will deliver the most value to SMEs, building up leadership and management capability, particularly through coaching, mentoring, and peer networks, and be complemented by a high quality digital offer as well to allow most businesses to self-serve. But we know that in the last few months, tech adoption has been absolutely huge. Who would have thought that we'd have been tearing around the country in various Zoom and Teams meetings in the course of our day without leaving our office or indeed our home? And flexible working is something that we were keen to do as a government through our employment bill anyway, to make sure that that's the default option. Small business people have been doing that for years. I've worked from my kitchen table, my study at home, through to clients' homes and offices. And as that becomes normal for people, we've got to remember that whether it's small businesses, medium businesses, or large, flexible working is not the same as permanently working from home. Or alternative, that could be, that last bit could be living at work. So we've got to make sure that we get the flexible working right by working with businesses in terms of their requirements and their tech adoption as well. We also fund Be the Business, which offers online resources to help businesses understand how new technology can improve their business and find the right tech solution for their needs, and crucially implement tech effectively into the business, an area where business can often fail. And just finally, I'm sitting in Victoria Street in Whitehall at the moment with Michelle Barnier just next door. We can't fail to mention the fact that we're getting into the tail end of our discussions and negotiations with the EU. So for small businesses in particular, whatever happens, there is going to be changes that businesses need. Whatever the results of what's going on next door, businesses do need to plug into gov.uk/transition. Because deal or no deal, they will have to they'll have to be aware of changes. So it's just better to get on the front foot now rather than waiting to the last minute, because we know preparation is everything. But I'm really looking forward to hearing the questions and the other contributors. So back to you, Robert.
Brilliant. And by the way, if you can just put a glass to your ear and tell us what they're talking about. First up to comment on that is Pete Oliver, who is the Managing Director for SMEs at BT and EE Enterprise. Pete, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Robert. And I completely agree with Paul. I mean, small businesses are crucial to the recovery that we're going to need to see post-COVID. They represent 60% of private sector jobs. And so really there can only be a recovery with a strong performance from small businesses. And what we're seeing is the crisis has profoundly impacted owners of small businesses. We carried out research with Small Business Britain recently and found more than half of small business owners are no longer confident in the future for their business. Nearly 60% cite cash flow as a really significant concern. And crucially, 46% expect to significantly increase their use of digital tools as a result of the pandemic, but many feel they need help on the digital skills that will enable them to do that. So that is a huge challenge if you're a small business owner. You don't have the resources of a bigger enterprise and you're facing uncertainty on your cash flow while everything around you is changing in terms of having to become more digital. I think, as Paul touched on, the government's provided some really welcome support with financial help, furlough scheme, loans, as well as targeted initiatives, like allowing businesses such as BT to transfer their apprenticeship levy money to small businesses. But the next place we feel we need to go is really around schemes that help businesses drive technology and adoption and digital practices. And that's not just for government, that's for the whole of industry. So at BT, we've played our part. We've launched our small business support scheme, which is focused on addressing those concerns we found in our research, concerns around connectivity, cash flow, and confidence. And I thought I'd just share a couple of the highlights from that scheme that give you an indication of what's working for small business owners out there today. So we've seen huge demand for connectivity, as you can expect, and we've been helping them fund ultra-fast connections for small businesses that want to get them. So there's a real demand for faster connectivity. But at the same time, we've also seen a lot of traction with our cashless payment solutions, and that's really because businesses are having to move to online payments or no longer take cash in the current environment. So that's what we're seeing on connectivity. More importantly, on confidence, we're providing free digital skills online learning through our BT Skills for Tomorrow program, and I've put in place a mentoring scheme with BT volunteers, providing expert advice on digital marketing, cybersecurity, and so on. And we've seen record levels of take up over the last few months as small business owners want to get involved in those schemes. And finally, on cash flow, we have seen customers come through to ask us for more flexible payment terms, which of course we've supported, as have many other big businesses. And we've increased the speed at which we're paying our own small business suppliers, moving that up to 30 days so that people are getting cash much quicker. So there's a lot coming out of that scheme. And one thing I would say is we are seeing a lot of startups beginning businesses. We're seeing an acceleration in new businesses being formed, and we're looking to support those as well. So we're learning about what works and what doesn't work all the time. I think it's all about industry working with partners, whether that be Small Business Britain or Digital Boost, who we use for our skills program, or whether it's working with people like the CBI, Be the Business, to really get close to what's happening with small businesses. But my overall thought would be we've got to work together to help small businesses, not just to become digital to deal with COVID, but also to become better businesses for the long term. Back to you, Robert.
No, brilliant. Thank you. Sorry, I was trying to find your report so I could drop it into the. So I could drop it in for everyone to read, but I'll do that in the next talk. I'll also drop in the CPS's own report, Platforms for Growth, which looked at how SMEs are benefiting from the digital revolution, but how much more could be done. So obviously, great minds thinking alike on that front. And now to Martin, who is the Policy and Advocacy Chairman at the Federation for Small Businesses, which it's obviously knows exactly what he's talking about.
Yeah, the clue's in the title, isn't it? I hope so. Thanks a lot, Robert. There are a lot of things we could say about this current environment, but one of the things I think is absolutely critical to be aware of is the context. Most businesses are now focused on survival before they can even think about growth. There is a really serious crisis, I don't think is an overstated word for it, that is likely to happen in the first quarter of next year, especially in some of the more vulnerable businesses involved in hospitality and leisure and the retail sector. But given that, how are we going to fight our way out of this situation? Well, I think the SMEs will provide the vehicle for that escape route. In the last recession, 80% of the private sector jobs that were created after the recession came from small businesses and the self-employed. We are clearly the source of a lot of innovation, and that ability to pivot and get onto new ways of doing business, I think, is absolutely essential to our recovery. But the biggest barriers are going to be things like business rates, which are clearly not something that I think anybody as an Elizabethan tax could be said to be a modern tax that can deal with the current environment. And of course, the old chestnut, which is regulation. We produced a report recently about the work done in British Columbia, which made massive progress in trying to reduce the the numbers of regulations that affected small businesses. And at a time when you want people to innovate, you need to make sure that those kind of barriers are out the way. So what could we do about COVID's impact? Well, the key thing is, with tech adoption being a significant change in the way people operate, broadband has now become the vital piece of infrastructure that everybody needs. I think Pete mentioned in his comments about the reliance on cash. More transactions performed digitally, and which that means that a reliable infrastructure becomes even more important. But tech adoption needs investment, and a lot of businesses are weighed down with COVID debt. So we're going to have to look at this issue in the next few months. And I know the government's done a lot to be able to postpone the time at which a lot of this debt is going to have to be repaid, but it's not going away. And if businesses want to invest in their business, they will need a much stronger balance sheet before they can do that. One other thing I'd add as well is Kickstart has been really welcomed by the FSB, but we'd like to see a version of it that would help new people who are starting their businesses getting involved. You can probably tell that I'm a sort of from the vintage that remembers the original enterprise allowance, and that helped me start my business back in the 80s. And I think a version of that would be really welcome now, and it's something that I think people could focus on in government. So what else could government do? Well, Paul knows one thing I'm almost certain to say, and it's payment. There is absolutely no doubt that when corporates get into trouble, the first thing they do is start slowing up payment to their supply chain. And it's absolutely essential that the government does all it can to prevent that kind of knee-jerk reaction. For me, it's totally counterproductive, but we need to stop those businesses that reach for that as the first option. And then, of course, the other thing is the tax environment. I think the government's going to avoid the temptation to start increasing taxes in this early period, but we must make sure that in the budget that instinct to react by putting up taxes in an emergency is avoided at all costs. We have got a very fragile recovery, and we need to do all we can to sustain it. And then finally, what can the bigger businesses like BT do? Well, I think Pete's just mentioned one of the things they can do is treat their supply chain with respect, make sure that they are treated fairly, and pay them on time. Thanks very much, Robert.
And thanks, Martin. And I'd echo that. We've highlighted the issue of late payments which has come up in polling and anecdotally as a huge issue. And our last panelist before the discussion is Annie Gascoigne, Director of Economic Policy at the CBI. Could I also just say, if you do have any questions, please start putting them in the Q&A box so we can put them to our panel and make the most of our time. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Robert. I agree with much of what's already been said. I think in terms of what we're seeing from the businesses that we speak to, it's obviously been an extremely tough time for SMEs throughout this crisis, and in particular, we saw slow recovery in activity over the kind of the 3 months to October, which has now been stalled as a result of further lockdown restrictions, and we're likely to see that coming through in the data in the months to come. And I think in particular SMEs, I think we've also seen their employment rates drop, and clearly there are some concerning things there in terms of what this crisis has done to SMEs. And I think in particular we're seeing in our economic surveys quite a significant elevated concern for SMEs around uncertainty, and that that is definitely impacting SMEs even more so than larger businesses. We're also seeing concerns over the outlook for demand, and as others have mentioned already, cash flow and cash positions for SMEs. So these are some of the kind of live challenges that lots of smaller businesses are dealing with right now. On the flip side, on the more positive note, We've also seen a huge amount of innovation and agility in our small and medium-sized business community, and in particular, the amount of technology adoption. We did a survey with the London School of Economics, which showed that 60% of businesses have actually used the time between March and July to adopt technology, and that's true of smaller businesses even more so than larger businesses. And additional research shows that around 2/3 of businesses still want, smaller businesses still want to use the coming months and years to adopt technology. The challenge, of course, there is always about the availability of cash, and that's coming through as a very strong concern. And SMEs on average want to spend around £10,000 on technology adoption, but actually accessing the cash in order to fund that investment, it is something that I think as government and as a business community we need to look at in terms of policy solutions. I think if you also look at SMEs, what you can see is that there are concerns around the impact that coronavirus has had on their ability to train staff going forward. So 53% of respondents to one of our recent surveys said that was, SMEs said that was a concern for them. And also around 56% said that they expect the ongoing kind of remote working and ways of operation under COVID-19 to have a negative impact on their workforce culture. And we also see that the impacts of the coronavirus pandemic on productivity of SMEs is more diverse for SMEs than it is for larger businesses. You can see far more larger businesses saying it's had a positive impact, whereas SMEs are more on the fence. And that's a key thing about SMEs. Clearly, they value the kind of the face-to-face interaction and clearly the kind of workforce training that you get from being in person. On a more positive note and looking to recovery, I think we're really pleased to see that lots of SMEs are very invested in contributing to net zero ambitions. So around 56% of SMEs think that they are going to change their business practices and to support net zero. A similar proportion also want to contribute to diversity and inclusion. And again, a similar proportion also want to be involved in supporting their local community. So I think if we look collectively at where there are opportunities for SMEs to really drive growth and prosperity in the future, clearly there's an appetite there for SMEs to do so. But as we've discussed already on this call, there are some economic challenges that they're facing in the short term and over the medium term in terms of their capacity and ability to invest. And so that's where I think government working with the business community need to look at policy solutions to support SME growth.
Thank you. Lots to dig in there, and of course, I mean, one point which you mentioned is obviously the impact of the pandemic has been not only different for a different type of firm, but very much distinct among sectors. I mean, before the call we were talking about the pub industry, which we've duly had a question on why can't you get a drink in a pub when you can go to a rugby match? I think, I mean, if we want to start off, I mean, lots to go there, but I just wondered on that issue of debt and the sort of the burden that firms will be taking into this. Paul, is that something that the government's aware of? Because obviously there are two phases on there. There's the immediate getting firms through this, but then there's the once the vaccine is here, once life starts to return to normal, you want to ensure that the companies are firing on all cylinders. At what point does that transition sort of start to take place, do you think?
Well, I think that it needs to be done, and you can't just stop one and then start the other process. So we're sort of starting. We started the process in terms of talking about how economic recovery might look back in the summer. Actually, whether it's making sure that we can increase productivity, look at how we increase productivity, how we build back with a green recovery as well, to look for new opportunities and these sort of things. But in terms of loans. I think we are very aware that businesses have taken on debt as well as the grant and other schemes. So we need to be mindful of that, and which is why we're working with banks to make sure there's significant amount of forbearance within all the schemes, especially the bounce back loans and the like. But we'll continue to be as flexible as we can, because, as you say, we don't want to be strangling a recovery as soon as it starts. The closer we can get to a V-shaped recovery, the better. But it's not a matter, I don't think, of getting through one stage before we get onto the economic recovery. We need to start those conversations now.
And on the issue of broadband, I mean, we've had one question, for example, about rural broadband, but and this is a question for all the panel. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of if people do need to upskill, there's a lot of infrastructure needed. I mean, do we think that the UK is on track to deliver on the extremely ambitious pledges in the Tory manifesto?
Yeah, I mean, I believe we are. We're putting a lot of money into it and a lot of energy into it as well. I think it's important. I mean, Peter will probably have more knowledge from the sharp end, as it were. But we're acutely aware of the need to deliver broadband, and infrastructure that we were talking about just 5 years ago has really just totally flipped on its head, with broadband probably being the number one. So it's something we can't afford to get wrong, frankly.
And with the other panelists have you on that? I mean, Pete, obviously it's your
Absolutely. Well, I'm Robert, let me give you a bit of an update on what we're doing at BT. So we have committed to build fibre to the premise, or full fibre, to 20 million properties by the late 2020s. That's a £12 billion investment. And actually, we've recommitted that and said the current crisis is not going to slow us down in terms of that investment. We're currently building connections to 40,000 homes a week. So huge rollout happening, but it does take time, because we have to often dig up the road and put the fibre connections in. In the meantime, though, we have got a number of alternative solutions, particularly for business customers. We've got 4G and 5G mobile coverage, which can now give very fast speeds and can get you set up very quickly. And we do provide for slightly bigger businesses dedicated lines, which we're now also subsidising. But I think the key message is that the appetite to invest has not gone away with the crisis, and our CEO has recommitted that 12 billion to build those 20 million lines.
Does anyone else want to come in on that? Don't feel you have to.
It's interesting, Robert. I remember only maybe a year ago, the problem was demand. If I spoke to the average small business owner, they couldn't quite see the point of a lot of this investment in broadband. They felt that they got adequate services the way they were. Suddenly, we're in a completely different world where they recognise immediately the need for this infrastructure. And the problem is, I'm not sure that we're going to meet that kind of demand as quickly as they would like to ramp it up. It's a massive problem, but it's one I'm sure that Pete's aware of.
Yeah. Brilliant. So just going through, the questions are sort of covering a wide spectrum of issues. I'll try and get through to them. I mean, just as Chris Parr asked specifically on the debt relief point, should the government consider capitalising these loans into equity holdings, or actually, I'm just writing them off? Anyone got, Martin?
Yeah, I mean, we supported the recent report by the City UK, which really went down two avenues. One was to adopt recapitalisation of a lot of that debt, but the second strand of that was to go for tax-related payments. So, in other words, it would only depend, your recovery of that debt would only depend on your profitability. So because it's a contingent tax liability recovered by HMRC, it would be off the balance sheet. And that makes a significant difference to those companies, because they're then able to borrow from other sources, because their balance sheet doesn't look completely sick, weighed down by a lot of this COVID debt.
Any thoughts from the CBI on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really good point. I think it's got to be a balance, right? Because there has to be. I think a lot of the banks at the moment are very much focused on helping customers repay and refinance the loans they've got, and clearly there is a question around kind of moral hazard and needing to sort of ensure that where loans that have been issued throughout the COVID crisis can be repaid, that they are done so. But I absolutely agree with Martin that there is a point here about the leverage ratios of some businesses, particularly at the smaller end. And what we hear a lot of the time is that, you know, income earned in one quarter is used to pay for bills in the quarter after. And so if you've lost, you know, if you're a pub or if you're a hotel, that you've lost a whole quarter's worth of income, it's very, very hard to see how you would ever be able to recover that loss over subsequent quarters. And therefore your business is living for at least, you know, in the medium term with a higher level of debt, which then constrains your ability to invest and grow out of that. So I certainly think, as part of economic recovery, looking at access to finance and broader options beyond yet further debt is something that the government's going to need to look at. But it needs to be balanced with sufficient incentive to get those loans repaid where they can reasonably be repaid.
I mean, as we all know, there's been a long-standing issue about pretty small firms, in particular in Britain, being more reluctant than their counterparts to take on debt and to borrow. Paul, I imagine you're not going to reveal new government policy on this today.
No, but as I say, I mean, I think this is why I started off and answered the question in terms about forbearance. I think that's the you know, the path that we've stated at this moment in time. We'll always look to be as flexible as we can, but in terms of I take the, you know, interesting points that Martin and Annie have said about what it means to bottom line and to get future debt, but in terms of making sure we can extend the terms of the debt, have them on preferential rates. And the like, is that, you know, the right balance that the Chancellor's taken at the moment.
So we had an interesting question from Ronald Lehman, who asks whether there's a perception problem. Do businesses realise all the things that government is doing for it? I mean, and do businesses think that the government do businesses think that government cares about them? I mean, Paul, I imagine you would say that, of course, government is doing everything it can to show that it cares about businesses.
Look, it's doing. I've talked about the fact that it's doing a lot. You know, the £200 billion that's coming out. But on the other hand, it's really difficult to communicate when you've got this existential emergency that we have. You know, it too often it gets boiled down to a health versus wealth argument, which is a little bit simplistic because so much of it is about people's behaviour. So the idea about wrapping our arms around the economy right at the beginning was right. The job retention scheme was exactly that. It was to try and retain as many jobs as possible. And then because of the fact that we were effectively putting a lot of money out the door very, very quickly, based on reverse engineering existing schemes. So the furlough scheme was based on PAYE, self-employment scheme was based on the tax return, the grant scheme was based on business rates. It meant that, yes, there were people that fell between the cracks, and it was very difficult to find ways of coming up with something that we could get out quickly enough to help as many people as we could without the various fraud checks and other bits and bobs that would push up the cost of administering those schemes. So clearly you can't do anything in emergency that's going to satisfy everybody, but we've got to put the communication out there, exactly what we are doing, what people are entitled to, which sometimes they don't grab hold of, and a way of getting to the end of this as well. It shouldn't be about government putting in all the sort of restrictions, government talking about letting you have a bit of time off for Christmas, and then government riding as the cavalry with vaccine. This is a joint effort with all of this, with people around the business community, but people around the country. If we all do the right thing, then we can get through this and get to that economic recovery, which is a hugely difficult communication piece, as you can imagine.
But I think generally the government, for most small businesses, has got pretty high marks for being able to respond quickly to what was a shocking crisis. But what the group that I think is most frustrated, and Paul will know this group, he's spoken to them, I'm sure, are those running, sole traders, running small businesses, limited.
We've had a question on precisely that.
Yeah, and they have definitely fallen through the cracks. And then there's the other group that are the newly self-employed who also have struggled to find any kind of support. But we have tried to be as positive as we can about this small limited company group. And we made a proposal, Paul may be aware of this, to Treasury recently about the Directors' Income Support Scheme, which is modelled on the same as the self-employed income support scheme. And we think that might be a way in which that group, that very important group, can be helped.
Yeah, and it's something I try and work with you guys, with the some of the unions and with the groups to actually sort of try and broker a conversation with Treasury. Look, I 10 years ago, pretty well to the year, I was a director paying myself through dividends because it was a cash flow issue, not any sense of tax avoidance, which goes back to Ronell's point about communications. Sometimes that does get distorted. And so it would be churlish of me to say that there haven't been people falling through the cracks and everything's wonderful, especially because I deal with the wedding sector, the nightclub sector, all of these areas that just haven't really even got to a position where they could even start to recover, to reopen. So there's plenty more that we need to look at, and I'm always up for those conversations, as I indeed have with the Excluded UK and Forgotten UK groups.
And actually, someone asks, which is probably, if anyone wants to chip in on this, anyone else wants to chip in on this, what can the government, what more can the government do to help the self-employed and directors of small companies? Not so much in terms of like immediate bailouts, but more generally, assuming they still want people to structure their businesses in this way, which sometimes it's fair to say the Treasury gives the impression that it's not terribly keen on.
Well, I think actually there was another question. I mean, you talk about with the gig economy as well. That we have this issue, this long-standing issue with when you're talking about the tax treatment, where you actually have 3 types of workers and 2 types of tax treatment. You've got workers employed and self-employed, and then you've got but the tax system only ever knows self-employed and employed. So there's a longer-term bit of work there, but clearly that shouldn't affect what we're doing now, which is, as I say, trying to protect as many jobs as I can. But the jobs thing is crucial when you talk about job retention bonus, because it was always about jobs. It wasn't necessarily a direct income compensation scheme. So there are 2 slightly different sort of paths, I think. But clearly, we don't want people to be going short and in that regard. So that's fair inequality and equity, I suppose, is not quite the same. Although, of course, we want to tackle that as retaining as many jobs in the system as we can. They're 2 slightly different conversations.
Pete, Annie, did you want to come in on that? Otherwise, I'm happy to move on. So I had another question before we started, which is how can, this is obviously really uncertain times, but I was really interested to hear that from the panelists that people are still creating companies, that people are actually still there. We haven't sort of crushed the entrepreneurial spirit, but what more can we do to sort of incentivize people to make that leap at such an uncertain time? How do we keep business quick? Because obviously we are going to lose companies as a result of this recession. How do we ensure that we build the business population back up?
Robert, I'll briefly comment on that because I mentioned it. I mean, we are seeing a lot of new businesses being created because there is a certain level of reorganization of the economy happening in terms of people's behaviors, and that is actually giving some people opportunities to create or even expand businesses in certain areas. So I think that is likely to play an important part in the recovery. In terms of helping those people, though, it is a huge undertaking to start a new business. There's lots to do. You don't have, may not have much support and so on. So I think any incentives that can be put in place to help people start a new business, give them the confidence to try that would be really beneficial. We've recently put in place a bursary scheme where we give 6 months free broadband to anyone with a new limited company. We've had a huge number of people applying for that. But I think between industry and government, if we can actually create the incentives for people to get back and start creating businesses, that's going to make a huge difference. And there probably will be some lasting changes that will mean that there are some of these new opportunities for people with business ideas.
And the other issue, of course, is that it's always been actually quite relatively easy in Britain to start a business. It's one of the things we do well, but it does become, all the surveys show, it does become, we are slower. I think we are, we plummet from the sort of the top of the OECD to the bottom, and once you get in terms of how quickly those businesses grow and start hiring.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned in my opening comments about, I think it's worth considering a version of Kickstart. Kickstart was designed to get people from unemployment into employment, and I think it could be very effective. But the same group could also be encouraged to go and start their own businesses, become self-employed. And I think if you just use the same philosophy but adopted it to new start businesses or the self-employed, I think it would work well.
Yeah, I mean, it's really these are all key areas that we need to work on. I mean, Panda's talking about in the chat is talking about the fact he's worrying about, as one of the 3 million people that won't be able to survive long term. And I totally feel for him, as someone that's wound down 2 businesses through 2 recessions over the last 25 years. I totally get that. But we've also seen, to answer the question or look at the question, is that after the last recession, there was a record number of people setting up businesses in sort of 2010 going onwards. So we must obviously try and incentivize that, work with people, work with organizations like BT and some phenomenal big companies that foster innovation, and work with organizations like Be the Business, which is a business to business group charity, effectively, that can offer mentoring. When I talk about mentoring, it's not about the Richard Bransons and Alan Sugars, the stereotype. It's offering support of someone that's just gone through the process that you're about to do, whether it's looking for loans, whether it's scaling up, as Martin was talking about, you may be setting up your second shop or something like that. All of these kind of areas need often particular kind of networking, particular kind of support, and that's what we want to make consistent across the country.
Annie?
Yeah, I would agree with everything that's been said. I think sort of stimulating entrepreneurship as part of an economic recovery strategy is absolutely key. I think the one sort of thing I would add, I think, is there's kind of increasing economic research that actually shows that there is a scarring impact of starting a business during a crisis or just after, as we see with the labour market. People who enter the labour market at the time of a crisis or just after it do tend to have a kind of lifetime earnings penalty from entering the labour market at that time. We saw that during the kind of 2008-9 recession, but actually there's emerging research, particularly in the US, that shows the same can be true of businesses as well. And it's not quite clear what's driving that, whether it's because they're entering a particularly hostile market, or whether it's because of financing issues. As you start a business, you're then living with higher costs of finance than you would if you were starting a business during the good times. And I think that's something that we need to think about. It's not just about the short-term challenges that we face, but are we creating the right environment for these new businesses to thrive as well as sort of survive? And also, I think, recognize, to this point about kind of businesses versus jobs, absolutely jobs are critical, but also you can't have jobs without the businesses employing them. So seeing those kind of hand in glove, and that there is a real economic cost of unnecessary business failure is something that we need to think about, as well as kind of stimulating that kind of entrepreneurship and thinking about what sort of challenges those new businesses are going to face.
Thank you. So I'm going to wrap a few questions here together, and hopefully in a way that makes sense. So one of the sort of things that worked for us after 2008 was the UK's flexible employment market. That we put on more jobs. I think at one stage we were putting on more jobs than the whole Europe put together. So Karen Renshaw was asked in the comments, referred to a new survey about Uber and Public First have put together, showing that 87% of drivers are parents, and that they appreciate the flexibility of the of that. Vicky Price, noted economist, has asked, what impact the the lack of the constraints on EU labour from the EU is going to have as people come in. And I'd throw in a sort of third element of that, which we put out a report on before the spending review, which was the increases to the living wage and minimum wage. We said, this is obviously a noble thing, but the sectors and the workers who are most affected by this are retail, hospitality, social care, and it's the young workers who are suddenly sort of basically charging a premium for their service, and are probably it's going to be tough to employ them. So this is a sort of long-winded way of saying, what do you see the employment market looking like? I mean, is the government, do we start to sort of move away from the idea of trying to sort of create a high wage economy and just sort of or is any job a good job in this scenario?
Well, I can answer a couple of those at least, because it was a bit of a round robin question.
Sorry, yeah, I'm not. We've got limited time, so I'm trying to bundle things together.
Yeah, that's fine. The EU labour one, I think there's a lag effect, because I think there's a lot of EU labour still living in the UK, and a lot of people haven't quite dealt with the problems of how would they recruit fresh labour that isn't, where they don't have the skills, and they need to look further afield for. So I think there's going to be a problem further down the line with that one. On the minimum wage issue, Paul will know I'm a low pay commissioner. So I sat in a very, very heated debate discussing minimum wage and its possible impact on these very fragile sectors of the economy. And I think we struck the right balance, but there is no perfect answer in this situation. We are trying to balance the interests and needs of a very, very wide range of employees, but I think it was about right. It was an emergency brake at a time of real economic crisis.
No, I think you're absolutely right, Martin. I think you did reach the right decision there. It may be we're absolutely keeping to our target of the national living wage, and also reducing the age for the people going from the national minimum wage up to the living wage as well, so that younger people can get access to it. But it might not be a straight line. It has to be in accordance to what is going on there. It's not mutually exclusive. It's all about balance and trying to hit that really difficult balance. But you're also, there's interesting points that you talked about in terms of flexibility, whether it's the questioner talking about flexibility for parents and people with childcare and all. Now that might be in employment. It might be about how we can support people setting up their own businesses around that as well. Just a year ago when we were talking about the employment bill, the idea of making flexible working the default option for people it was seen as a big challenge. Actually, we're now in a very, very different position entirely, because people have seen the use. And I'm slightly wanting to, again, get the balance right. I've talked about the fact that permanently working from home was like living at work. So it's important that in terms of giving people the flexibility to build a career around their other pressures, we do it in a sensitive way. There's a couple of questions talking about what happens with Zoom, with Teams, and how you have the light bulb moment, networking, which is especially relevant for young people. I see people from my office and elsewhere, all the calls I do, so many young people in their own bedrooms, or maybe in their parents' house, or with housemates, because here in London, obviously it's really expensive, so not everybody can work at home in a decent way and get the networking of the older seasoned professionals that maybe been around to show them what to do. Zoom calls are great, amazing, but they're also a little bit like a Truman Show version of real life. It's slightly curated, so someone's always invited everybody there. Exactly. So again, it's just the flexibility rather than permanent swing one way or other. But there is some permanent behaviour change that's baked into the system, I suspect. Now we've got to find out exactly what that is and work with the grain.
I mean, one thing which sort of unites all this is that recessions generally punish people who are like they punish the young, they punish the vulnerable, they punish people who are just starting out, and people with assets and resources and experience and skills and networks tend to do better. And here, the nature of this recession is exacerbating that completely.
And look, with workers' rights, with minimum wage, the last thing I'm going to be doing is making sure that there's no way we are going to be punishing people as a result of our policies. It's difficult enough in this with the situation as it is. I want to make sure that we are working with the most vulnerable to strike that right balance.
Pete, any thoughts on any of those issues?
Well, I just briefly reflect that I think there will be permanent changes to how people work. At BT, we moved tens of thousands of people to working from home, including contact centre staff, in a matter of weeks, which would never have happened if this crisis hadn't occurred. So I think businesses of all size will see some of the advantages of offering flexible working, and I think that will be a feature of employment going forward. But I do agree with Paul. I think the current situation is not how businesses will operate permanently.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think on the kind of the outlook for the labour market, it's so tricky, because I think this normally what you see, and there is some sort of research, I think, by the Resolution Foundation and others, that shows that post crises, where job creation comes from tends to be kind of low pay sectors, and obviously in this crisis those have been the ones that are most severely impacted. So there is that trade-off with national minimum wage and national living wage, and the opportunity for job creation and job protection. But I think as Martin and Paul have said, it is important to continue to strive towards what our long-term ambitions are. So I think sort of taking that cautious balance is always going to be important. And yes, I think in terms of some of the other questions that were raised, I think in terms of the impact of international workers. I mean, interestingly, we have had increasing kind of concern from SMEs, particularly around a second wave of people leaving in advance of the UK leaving the EU, or sort of formally exiting the transition period at the end of this year. And I think part of that is clearly driven by COVID and the desire to be in closer proximity to family, and if something like this happens again. So we are seeing concerns about kind of labour market shortages in sectors that rely more heavily on EU workers, and that's something that we need to look at as well from a kind of future labour market perspective. And I think this point about kind of working remotely, I think absolutely, and the evidence is very mixed on what impact that has on firms in terms of productivity, in terms of their ability to lead and manage. But I think what we're hearing, I think interestingly, less from the consumers of property at this point, and more from the providers, your landlords and your property funds, is that they're saying, well, actually the demand hasn't gone away for office space, but it's really shifted. So where previously we might have had a client coming to us asking for 60-70% desk space and 40-30% collaborative space, actually that's completely switched around now. And so I think many businesses will, and we see that from the evidence from the surveys, that businesses really value that collaborative working environment for creating innovation, for creating the right culture, for solving problems. But the office of the future, or the workplace of the future, is going to look very different, and it's going to have very different purposes. And that's an exciting challenge, because it means it may fit people's lifestyles more readily, more people being able to kind of balance the challenges of work and their regular lives more easily. But I think it will be something that lots of businesses will have to deal with, and for SMEs it will be an interesting challenge to see how they can make that work.
Well, the next question I was going to ask, Paul has actually dived into the Q&A and answered it himself, which was about how what more large about the idea from Philip at JCB having BEIS help sort of sponsored?
Well, yeah, because it's working through how we can work from a national perspective, because we do work on a local perspective in terms of our growth hubs, but working on sectors is something I'm happy to take up with JCB and others, because it's my colleague Nadeem Zahawi has been dealing with those sort of sectors, but clearly he's suddenly got another job, big job in terms of delivering the vaccine. So I'll have to touch base with him as we all divvy around some of his extra work in BEIS to, and maybe I can grab hold of that.
And I'm really sorry, we're not going to get through all of the questions, but I mean, Paul has seen them. I suspect he's not going to answer the question about why we can't reopen pubs in tier 2. Although
I can try. I can have a go, because it's something that I was really keen to work on, the tier structure. You do need to give people a sense of hope, i.e. at tier 1, because organised religion has worked well for a couple of thousand years by sort of effectively turning left for redemption and turning right if you're a sinner. This comes back to the behavioural point that I was talking about right at the beginning. Tier 2, I really know as the hospitality minister, I know only too well the challenge of the fact that not having mixed households means it's really difficult to be viable for a pub, even serving food. If you're not, then it's tough. It's scant, I know it's scant support for you, but there are ways that UK Hospitality and others have suggested about having partnerships with mobile caterers, other restaurants and things, which actually does work within the guidance. I know that's only going to be a small percentage of pubs, but in terms of support, in terms of what more we can do with the tier system, I will keep on pressing, because I speak to the pub and restaurant sector pretty well every day at the moment.
Well, we're almost out of time, so I'm going to have a sort of final lightning round. I mean, I'd have loved to ask questions. I'm really sorry. I'd love to ask questions about exports, manufacturing, all the rest of it. But if there was sort of one thing that Paul and his colleagues should do, or Paul, if there's one thing that you think you want to sort of focus on, to help Britain's SMEs, not just through the crisis, but after the crisis, what would it be? Well, go in reverse order and start with Annie.
Yeah, I think for me it would be the investment and growth challenge, and how can we get SMEs to post-crisis where they're probably not in the right headspace to be investing, to really look to the opportunities for diversification and growth in the future, and what are the sort of enablers to that point about access to finance. I think that has to be the number one thing for me.
Brilliant. Martin?
I'd put the focus on payment terms. I think the culture of poor payment needs to be tackled head on, and it's worse at the moment because of the current crisis. And I know it's very high up Paul's list of things to do, but it is the number one thing for most small businesses that really damages their ability to grow.
Pete?
I would say providing support for technology adoption and digital skills retraining. There's a comment in the chat about retraining. That will help people get through this, but also help small businesses be very successful for the future and drive an economic benefit. It's something for government. It's also something for companies like BT to support.
And I should say, I did try to put BT's report on this into the chat, but Zoom, for reasons of its own, doesn't let you post links. But you can Google. And you can Google CPS's own work. And finally, Paul.
Thanks very much. Yeah, I could talk about the strengthening the payment code, which we're relaunching this month, about the giving more powers to the Small Business Commissioner on late payments. Martin's right, that's number one. But the thing I haven't nailed yet, which I'd really like your help on, all of the people on here, is to how to get that consistent business advice around the country, so it doesn't matter where you are in the UK to start. We've got some ideas, but I'd love to know what more small businesses actually want, rather than me trying to do everything from the centre.
I think that's a pretty good note to start on, finish on. And obviously, if anyone watching this has thoughts, please do let us know. I'd like to thank all of our panelists, in particular Paul Scully, for their time today. I'd like to thank BT for supporting this, and in fact for coming up with the idea of it in the first place. And I'd like to thank all of you for watching. This is an absolutely crucial area. We're going to be publishing a load of stuff on it at the CPS in the coming months. I'm sure the FSP and CBI will also be doing the same, because as has been said, even small businesses are where the jobs come from, they're where the growth comes from, they are the backbone of the economy, and we need to do everything we can to help them. So thank you all very much, and please follow CPS Think Tank on Twitter and subscribe to our newsletter list to get invitations to more of these wonderful events. But thank you to our panelists, and thank you all for